Hi, I'm Steve Adubato. Everything you want, frankly, what you need to know about politics in New Jersey and the nation. We have two political experts. We're joined by our good friend, Phil Alagia, who's Democratic strategist and chief of staff in Essex County to the county executive, Joe DiVincenzo, and also another great friend, Jeanette Hoffman, Republican strategist and president of Marathon Public Affairs. Good to see you, Phil and Jeanette.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for having us.
We don't do politics per se. We don't do partisan politics. We don't do what's going on every day. So we're taping at the end of September, being seen later. There's a gubernatorial election. The incumbent, Phil Murphy, the Republican challenger, Jack Ciattarelli. Someone's going to win. Jeanette, what will be the most significant issues, whoever wins for governor, from a policy perspective, that he will face?
Well, we're still in a pandemic, Steve, and I think that's largely defined Governor Murphy's term and how he's handled it. And that's some of the issues that Jack Ciattarelli, the challengers, raise, is how Governor Murphy's dealt with the pandemic. According to Jack Ciattarelli, he could have done better. Some of the issues that he talks about is, 1/3 of small businesses in New Jersey have closed. So that's an issue that we've been hearing on the campaign trail. Taxes, the economy, always important issues for New Jersey. We are one of the most expensive states to live in. Jack Ciattarelli is saying Phil Murphy's not your candidate because Phil Murphy himself has said, if you care about taxes, we're not your state. So, that's an issue that we're always going to deal with here in New Jersey, the cost of doing living, property taxes.
Whole range of other issues. By the way, if this is seen before November the 2nd, check out our two in-depth half-hour interviews, one with Governor Murphy, the other one with Jack Ciattarelli. Phil, you're in government, but you're also in politics, as you will. What do you believe, beyond COVID and dealing with it, will be the major issues facing our next governor, be the incumbent or the challenger?
I think it has to be, you say in spite of COVID or except for COVID, but
is it only COVID, Phil?
Once we get past COVID and this whole thing, I think we're going to have to dig out of financial situations, how we do schooling, how we run our government, what businesses do. Are they going to come back and have, small businesses are closing around the country and not in New Jersey. And we do lead our peer states, New York, New Jersey, New York, Delaware, Pennsylvania, in how we handle the COVID response. But we're going to have to financially figure out how we get what the new normal is. I don't think we're ever going to get back to where we are. I don't think companies are going to have people come into the office 5 days a week, and that impacts the people who are doing selling coffee downstairs in the offices. So I think the next governor, who will be Phil Murphy, will be responsible for the economic impact of getting out of this.
All right, so both of you, one Democrat, one Republican, but neither of you is seen as extremist, if you will. Right? People can decide what that means. Phil, and then Jeanette, same question, but with a different twist. Phil, is there really one Democratic Party, or is there a party with extremes? Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, the Senator Manchin from West Virginia, and then everyone else trying to figure out where they are. Are there really two parties that are not united on very much, Phil? And then trust me, Jeanette, there's a Republican/Trump party question coming. Go ahead, Phil.
Trump, Tea Party. I think that's what's great about the Democratic Party is we have an inclusive, all-inclusive tent. We have moderates, we have very liberal Democrats, and we come together and try to put the best Democratic platform forward.
Do you come together, Phil? Do you really come together, the Democrats? Listen, we don't know what's going to happen in Washington as we speak, but do you really believe Democrats of all stripes are coming together as opposed to fighting with each other constantly?
I think that's the problem with both parties, right? Do you think the moderate Republicans are going to come together with the Trump Tea Party Republicans? It's an issue that's facing. I mean, some people say 10, 15, 20 years from now, will we have three parties? Will we have a far left party, a far right party, and a moderate party? And then Jeanette and I may be in the same party at that point.
Phil, Jeanette, Phil makes a great point. The Democrats have this very large tent with a lot of debate and discussion and, frankly, disagreement. But the Republicans, in spite of what Phil Alagia just said, do you really have diversity in your party? Or with the Liz Cheney, I apologize, Congresswoman Cheney and so many others who are not even going to run again because they're moderates. Phil says they're moderate Republicans. They're like, there's no place for us in your party. Is there really a place in the Republican Party for someone like You, Jeanette, who's a moderate, not a Trump.
I'm not going anywhere. I think
but
we need
how
more
could you be-
moderates in the Republican Party. And I think, frankly, Joe Biden is the best thing to happen to the Republican Party. If you look what's going on in Washington, the higher taxes, people don't like what's happening with this Democratic Party on the Republican side. And I think that's kind of rallying the Republican base. Look, as a Republican, a lifelong Republican, I don't like to see, some of the things that happen in my party with the Trump rhetoric. And I think there's a lot of Republicans like me who, are disappointed in that. But, I'm not going anywhere. I know a lot of Republicans like me who aren't going anywhere. And I'll go back at Phil. Look, there's moderates like Josh Gottheimer who feel like there's no room for them in the Democratic
members of
Party.
Congress. Yeah, say that again. I interrupt you. Democratic members of Congress, part of the, I guess they're called the problem solvers. We actually check out our interview with Congressman Gottheimer. You're saying he and Ocasio-Cortez can't fit in the same party? Is that what you're saying,
Yeah,
Jeanette?
I mean, he is getting so beat up for standing up for his constituents and not backing Nancy Pelosi's trillions of dollars in new taxes because he wants to work with the Problem Solvers Caucus to come up with responsible solutions. There are very few moderates in Congress right now on the Republican side and the Democratic side. And I think that, frankly, has to change.
Phil, go ahead.
It's the same with Rodney Freelandheising, why he didn't run for re-election.
As a Republican moderate, correct?
Say that again?
As a Republican moderate in Congress, he said, no, I'm tapping out.
Correct.
What do you think that has to do with Trump?
I think because he realized in his district with what was going on, he couldn't win with the national Trump agenda.
So, Phil, wait a minute. By the way, there are members of Congress, and if we can, we have time, we're going to do a second segment with Phil and Jeanette to talk about the broader term implications of this. But Jeanette and Phil, there are members of Congress who are actually saying right now, particularly Republicans, I'm not running for re-election again, some of whom actually said that Joe Biden won the presidency and they would not stand for the January 6th insurrection. They would not challenge the results of the election. Some of them are not running, Jeanette and Phil, because they're afraid of violence against themselves or their family. That's politics in America, Jeanette?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a crazy time and some of them are not. But look, I'm hopeful coming into the midterms. It's a different world right now. Trump is not president. Biden is president. He has to own some of these crazy policies, some of these very socialist, very high tax policies. And I think it's going to be a different midterm cycle. Look, we don't know if President Trump is going to run again in 4 years. I think it's going to be a different ballgame.
Do you want him to run?
I frankly don't. I think it's time for a different change in leadership in the Republican Party. I'd like to see some other candidates run. So we'll see. But I think the midterms look good for Republicans. I think it's going to be a different direction. I think there's a lot to talk about.
Phil,
Hey, Steve,
go ahead.
there's a big difference. When we were younger, when you walked into a classroom and you said, what do you want to do for a living? There was a handful of boys and girls who'd raise their hand and say, I want to be president. I want to be congressman. I want to get involved. Right now, you don't have that anymore. You don't. It's no longer noble. It's no longer something that people want to do, and it's to the detriment of society. We're not getting our best and brightest. There's not civil discussion. There's no more. When you served in the assembly, they would all go to that steakhouse, Democrats and Republicans, and they would argue, but they would come together and compromise. It is going to be the detriment to the country if we can't figure out how to have a civil discussion on politics and we can't get any.
And by the way, we're going to have a second.
I agree with Phil.
You agree with him, but also, Jeanette, you were too young to remember in 1985 when I was in the legislature as a child, Phil, you have to remind people. It was Pete Lorenzo's in Trenton. I was on the state finance committee, the Assembly Finance Committee, Democrats, Republicans. We'd agree, disagree, fight, debate, argue, then go to Lorenzo's at night to have dinner together and actually socialize and become friendly with each other. Try that in Washington or Trenton today. To Phil, to Jeanette, thank you so much for a spirited, but as always, civil discussion. We'll be right back right after this.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by Holy Name, Valley Bank, NJM Insurance Group, Berkeley College, Operating Engineers, Local 825, Fedway Associates, Inc., PSC&G, IBEW Local 102, and by Community Food Bank of New Jersey. Promotional support provided by NJ.com and by ROINJ.
Data shows that many patients have avoided seeking critical health care in the wake of COVID-19 for fear of contracting the virus. Delaying medical care can have serious consequences, so you should never second guess or ignore your symptoms. At Holy Name Medical Center, we have measures in place to prevent infectious disease from spreading. We're clean, we're open, and we're safe for all your healthcare needs.